warm welcome to our studio guests today and to fellow travelers out in cyberspace, thanks to that non-stop stream of zeros and ones. My name is Peter Gobets, co-founder of the Zero Project and moderator of the International Conference-cum-Workshop on Zero. The Zero Project is a three-stage affair. There's a book project, an associated online event, and the in-depth research program to follow. Today, session number 16, and we welcome 3 contributors to the monograph on Zero Book Project. Professor Alberto Pelissero, Department of Humanities, University of Turin in Italy, on the Buddhist concept of shunyata in connection with the invention of zero or otherwise. And Professor Mayank Vahia, formerly Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, India, and his former student, Ms. Upasana Neogi, Masters in Science, Masters in Electronic Science. Professor Vahia and Ms. Neogi had both attended our Camp 02 workshop in 2017. Our panelists today are Dr. Anders Erik Hoogkarsveld, philosopher in the Netherlands, and fellow trustee of the Zero Project, Indologist Dr. Victor van Bijlert. Alberto, please introduce yourself briefly and present the thrust of your paper, please.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Alberto Pelissero, and I am teacher of Sanskrit language and literature here in University of Torino, Italy. And the title of my paper should be Some More Unsystematic Notes on Shunya. And if you want, I begin to say something about this contribution.
Please do. Please go ahead.
Thank you. The term shunya, meaning void, and in mathematical literature, zero, derives from shuna, that is the past passive participle of the root dhatu shvi, meaning to grow, to swell, according to Paninian rules. So, from the etymological point of view, shuna means swelled, swollen, increased, grown. And if you see this etymological value, it could seem a paradox that the semantical sphere of shuna, in fact, is not too far from purna, meaning full. Purna is an important, a key term in Indian philosophical lexicon, because you may see, for example, the incipit of the Isha Upanishad, Ishavasya Upanishad, Purnamadah Purnamidam, Purnah Purnamad Udvodachyate, Purnasya Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. According to the phonetic treatises of Vedic times, for example, to Rigveda Pratishakya, shuna, it indicates a fault in Vedic recital consisting in an utterance with a swollen mouth. So this term shunya, occurs within Upanishadic literature, even in the Maitri Upanishad, together with other epithets and with other terms being referred to Brahman. And these terms mean something like pure, clear, pacified, shuddha, puta, shanta. Etymologically, so shunya should therefore mean something like a void space, a hole determined by a borderless opening, by an unlimited disclosing. According to lexicographers such as Amarakosha, possible synonyms of shunya are shapeless, meaningless, void, vain, hollow, asara, palgu, vashika, tuccia, riktaka. And this kind of voidness is conceived, first of all, as a sort of diminution or deprivation, as we can see from a well-known good saying from a Subhashita that is centered around this very same term, shunya. Void is the house for he who is songless. Void is the time for he who is friendless. Void are the 4 cardinal points for he who is silly. Void is the whole word for he who is pure. This is a quotation from the Matsakatika by Shudraka. This reference to the cardinal points, to the dish, is not at all a trivial one, because it explains why the term shunya could be made as a synonym with ethereal space or atmospheric space or heaven, respectively akasha, ethereal space, ka, atmospheric space, vyoman, heaven. The accepted synonymity of shunya with ka could be considered as a crucial point, a crucial turning point in the elaboration of the concept of the mathematical zero. The abstract derivate shunyata is recorded in Buddhist literature, mainly of the Mahayana type of the great vehicle, first of all in the school of the Madhyamaka headed by Nagarjuna. And in this context, it means voidness, the fact of being void, and even as vacuity, as emptiness. There is a great deal of debate according to which translation is better, either voidness or emptiness in this context. The concept of the zero grade is important in a further area of Indian culture, that is the grammatical tradition, the Vyakarana. But in fact, in this context, it is never employed, shunya is never employed as a technical term. We could refer to shunya in such context like the phonic zero grade from the phonetical point of view. But let's try to deepen our eye about this context. If you see at phonic zero, intending it as absence of any sound whatsoever, pure silence, to be found obviously in alternation with sound, especially between vocalic gradation, what we call epophony, it is well known that the zero grade is used into an apophonic scale. But we must note that the grades known in Western use as normal or third grade and extended or lengthened grade both correspond to a semi-technical term, respectively normal or third grade guna, for example in Sanskrit a, e, o, and extended or lengthened grade Verdi, for example in Sanskrit a, long a, I, au. And these two grades are taught as a replacement of a zero grade that is corresponding to short a, short e, short u. This is well known, who everyone has some familiarity with Paninian grammar. By contrast, the grade that we call weak or reduced or zero grade does not correspond to any univocal Sanskrit technical word, because it is treated exactly as the other zero replacement of phonemes, and what is most important, it never takes the name of shunya. It is not perhaps a mere chance that we call zero grade, that what we call zero grade is not described by Indian grammarians in positive words, but only as an exception. It is subject to specific rules of application to guna and verdi grades. The technical term used in such cases, it is lopa. Lopa is a name giving to the meaning of adarshanam, non-perception, by means of a meta rule of a paribhasha to be found in the Mahabharata, the great commentary by Patanjali to the grammar of Panini. The problem now is which of these three main shades of meaning of shunya first suggested the other two. Did the mathematical one, the grammatical one, or the Buddhist philosophical meaning come first? There is a great deal of debate in this question. Therefore, even if we cannot rule out the possibility that the apophonic zero could be the base of the mathematical zero, it is only the letter, the mathematical zero, that takes the name of Shunya. The doubt whether or not the philosophical use could precede the mathematical one still remains. Even in the field of architecture, we may see the value of the void asserting itself. It is sufficient to think, for example, of what we define as the sanctum. Indians call it the Garbhagriha, the house of the embryo, in the sanctuary of Shiva Nataraja in Chidambara, enclosing the signum made of space, the Akasha Linga. Technically, it is a void space, a space representing an icon being worshipped by the devotees, but this icon is made of space, so it is an empty space. Within the mathematical field, zero is the base, obviously, of the system of numerical positional notation of the decimal scale. It is the void space that permits the passage from units to tens and so on. The Yajurveda enumerates the names of the powers of 10, starting from 100, Eka, up to Pararda. The synonyms of zero, to be found in mathematical, astronomical, astrological texts in the Jyotish Shastra, are all specification of a semantic field that generally covers the concept of space. But it is a large sphere that combines different notions, and it is variously declined in such terms as ethereal space, surrounding space, void space, atmospheric space, Akasha, Ambara, Ka, Gagana. Other kinds of synonyms are more interesting because they range from an apparent antonym, meaning full, Purna, to the term for point, Bindu, up to the little circle used in writing as a sign for zero, Chidra, Randra, both words meaning whole. And possibly it is not a mere chance that the first quotation of zero as a mathematical symbol is to be found not within a mathematical treatise, but within a metrical text, the Chanda Sutra by Pingala, Chandra Sutra by Pingala 8.2831. Obviously, quotations from mathematical literature are numerous to be quoted here now. Now, if we shift to a philosophical perspective, we may note, for example, that Chandrakirti, the Buddhist philosopher Chandrakirti, declares that vacuity, shunyata is an abstract term formed by adding a suffix of abstractness, ta, to the term shunya. So shunya, void, shunyata, voidness, the fact of being void, the condition of being void, or shunya, empty, and shunyata, emptiness, the fact of being empty. Chandrakirti declares that vacuity, that shunyata, acts for intellectual activity like a purge acts for the body, purify it, and being expelled together with the pathogenic factor that is carried away by its action. That being the case, vacuity cannot cling to the intellectual as a conceptual construction, but it must be carried away in its turn when it has carried out its goal. So it must go away after having been assumed. Is something that is doomed to go away. And starting from this note by Chandrakirti, we may pass to another use of the concept of shunya, of void, always in the context of Buddhist thought, but shifting to the philosophy of language from the Buddhistic point of view. The most important conception of language in the field of Buddhist philosophy of language is the concept of Aport Exclusion. Apoha has a lot to do with Shunya. Apoha is the exclusion of everything else from the semantic sphere of a single word. The single word is not the semantic sphere of a single word is not defined by a positive contribution, but only the negation of everything that is external to that word. It is not possible to say something positive about the word horse, for example. It is possible only to say that a horse is all that has nothing to do with what is not a horse. And from this particular point of view, the Buddhist philosophers of language tried to use the concept of Shunya, adapting it to the context of Apoha, of exclusion. As a conclusion, we may note that even Indian mystics tried to follow 3 different paths in order to express what is ineffable, what is not seeable, what is not possible to express with words. The first path is the path of poetic language through the use of metaphor, the main way, and the other 2 are subordinate to it. The limits of expressibility are transcended by poetic language, and mystics use this tool of communication in order to reach what is properly not expressible with words, what is ineffable. The second part is paradox, so the use of contradictory predicates in order to characterize the specific experience of what we want to communicate. Within the field of Jainism, this path is present in the type of the systematic simultaneous application of predicates that are all authentic, but at the same time mutually contradictory, the famous Sachdev, with reference to a metaphysical assessment. Thus, from a certain point of view, it is possible to assert a proposition, and from another point of view, it is possible to negate the same proposition. There is a famous example that has been introduced by Bimal Krishna Matila, and I use now in conclusion. If you see the phrase, John does not drink, we may intend it as valid with reference to the fact that John does not drink spirits, but it is invalid with reference to the fact that obviously John does effectively drink water, for example, or milk. So it is not possible to conceive the hypothesis that John does not drink any liquid substance whatsoever. The third part is apophatism, the negative dialectics, according to the Upanishadic dictum, neti neti, not so, not so, that is to be found in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 236. And further elaborated by Madhyamika dialectical into an absubstantialist device. To assign any possible predicate to a mystical object is only a vain venture, even sort of predication being successively negated. But if we are able to reiterate this process more and more, progressively negating every variety of possible descriptions, we will be able to convey the desired meaning in a negative way. Now, as a conclusive remark, the question, are there allied concepts that can be associated with the mathematical idea of zero? Our tentative answer could be as follows. The connection between shunyata and mathematical zero cannot be denied, but it is very difficult, is indeed impossible perhaps at present, to detect a genetic or at least a chronological relation between them, in order to say which one of the two comes before the other one. As far as the second relation is concerned, the one linking shunyata through apoha to the concept of ineffability, we should conclude that probably the need deep to find a way to tell with words the impossibility to describe with accuracy Brahman prompted the school of Vedanta known as Kevala-Advaitavada, the school held by Shankara, to re-elaborate, to rework, to reshape the basic idea of apoha in order to adapt it to the description of Brahman in apophatic terms, in negative terms. This is perhaps the most amazing link between the different facets of Shunyata. The metaphysical one, Shunyata, the linguistic one, apoha, and the mathematical one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Very much. Very interesting and very tangible, the way you cross-relate, cross-index various aspects of Indian philosophy and literature to the emergence of zero. We're a long way from concluding anything. I agree with your conclusion in that sense that it's very tempting to connect the two, but if we're going to do this scientifically, it should be on a sounder basis than simply speculating. But this is actually a very good basis to proceed on different fronts in discussions with different experts from different cultures. We're more and more inclined to think that maybe zero was not even invented. So we're talking about a moot point. Again, it's too early. We may change our mind, or we haven't made up our mind. But there are various reasons to think that the placeholder simply evolved to assume more and more aspects, which eventually, in retrospect, from our day and time, are projected on ancient cultures as though zero was invented, whereas it was a gradual evolution. But again, that's where we're headed. That's where we want to go, and this is certainly a very good contribution to that. So thank you very much. Ms. Upasana will present a joint paper written together with Professor Vahia on zero's utility and versatility in the sciences. She also plans to publish a high school textbook on zero. And while next month, Mayank himself will present a second solo paper taking a wider view of zero in the Indian context. So dear Ms. Upasana, we have tried your patience for 4 years now. The moment has come. Please introduce yourself briefly and then proceed with the presentation, if you would.
I'm Upasana Neogi from Calcutta, India. I lately work with Mayank Vahia, Professor Mayank Vahia of TIFR on archaeoastronomy, and my interests are in astronomy, radiophysics, remote sensing. I worked on Zero project with Dr. Vahia in the Zero workshop from conference in Delhi, and I would share some concept on zero in Indian context through a presentation. Please show the presentation. Yes. For the Indian context, I would like to show first that zero, how it is used. In the first use of zero, when we talk about zero, we don't need to say zero. Like about the year 2021, we don't need to tell 2021. It could be till as 2021. Next line, please. And for trading, zero is not needed, because if you give some money and take back, in trading, it's much earlier arithmetic is needed, but in India, it is not recorded how zero is there. Can you, sir, can you please give next line? The first use of zero as a dot can be found in Bakshali manuscript and Subandhu's Vasavdatta. And even 0 as a new form, that is the oval shape, can be found in the inscriptions in the Gwalior fort, that is the Chaturbhuj temple in Gwalior fort, which is date back to the 9th century, where it is not used as bindu, it is used properly as the number 270. It can be seen there. Next line, please. 0 as a number and equation was first formulated by Bhaskara in the 7th century AD, around 628 AD rather. Till then, 0 was only used as a placeholder or something else with different ideas in different places, like in Mayan, Sumerians, Chinese. But Bhaskar in India first gave equations on 0. How it can be used as a number, we can see there only. Next slide, please. Zero and culture means when in Indian culture, 0 is intermingled. 0 in arithmetic is old as trading started in India. Trading started much earlier in India from Mohenjo-daro times, but the idea of 0 was not clear that time. Next line. 0 was only used as a placeholder which came from Mayans and the Sumerians in different ways. Next line. Please share the whole slide, please. Yes. 0, which means nothingness previously, only nothingness, not a number. It was first ignored by the Europeans because they were afraid of the void thing. But India accepted 0 in various forms, as in null, as in emptiness, even as in completeness also. Next slide. 0 first. Sir, can you please share the whole slide totally? 0 in the first, we in the Indians thought 0 as shunyata, means nothing is there. From there, something came up, means it is the creator. It is not related to any religion. There was no religion when shunyata came into being. Nothing means if you there is some ideas in astronomy as well. If we think about Big Bang, even it started from a point. So if you think 0 as that, it can be 0 started from Shunyata, which was given in the Nasadiya Sukta. Next slide, please. Zero is also thought as emptying the mind. Meditation is a very primitive part in Indian culture. Meditation, when we think of meditation, we think of nothingness. Nothingness and empty. It is a philosophical 0. It is not that the number 0 we are thinking of. Emptying mind is a different form of 0, which can be nulling out the mind. Next slide. Later, the Vedic people thought of preserving their creations, what they created. But for preservation, there need to be some language which should be carried forwarded and it should be recorded in some ways. So for that, they created a language that is the Sanskrit. And Sanskrit consists of various rhythms, music, and verses. There you have to be very precise, and there we can find use of 0, or rather nullingness, not 0, in a different form that we can see in the next slide. In Sanskrit, as I told earlier, Sanskrit is a very precise language and it's a forms of rhythms and verses. So there, the words should be merged to make it rhythmic or to make it a small, precise word. And it should have some rhythm, means chand. And for that, we need to unite two words or more than that. And that unition of word is called sandhi, mean putting it together. And for making sandhi, we need to omit few things, few syllables in between. Even the Vedic people tried to conjunct vowels and consonants together to make a new script, that is abugida or alpha syllabary. Next slide. These formula of Sanskrit, how to add the words, how to make the Vyakaran or grammar of that, it was done by the great grammarian Panini. For making Sandhi, Panini used the concept of lopa, that is disappearance. This lopa is used when uniting a word, we null out few things like the vowel or the consonants in between two words to make it together. And for that, Banini gave a few rules, that is the Adashanam, the loss of sounds. So the whole slide, please. There we can have Ashravanam, that is non-hearing, an Ucharan, non-pronunciation, an Upalabdhi, non-availability, Abhav, non-existence, Varna Vinasha, loss of sound. So there are various forms of Sandhi. His rules were given, one for the linguistic description, one for grammatical operation, and one for sutra arrangement. Say for an example, in English we have 3 times become thrice. That is, loping means nulling out double E and introducing ICE. In Sanskrit also there are various examples of this lope form, that is nulling out to make sandhis. Next slide. Zero can also be found in a textbook which dates back to 200 BC, that is Vaisheshika. In Vaisheshika, it gives how the universe works without introducing any religion, God, anything. There we can find the mention of atoms, molecules, how the universe started, and there are 5 primary things in Vaisheshika, that is the solid, liquid, air, fire, and space. Among these 5 things, 4 of them have Parmanu, but space doesn't have Paramanu. And the source of life is Atma, and higher intelligence is defined as Man. And like space, Atma and Man doesn't have atoms, that is no Paramanu. Paramanu means atom. So they are void, means they're empty. Then Atma, space, and Man, these are void. They are talking about null in Vaisheshika, which dates back to 200 BC. Next slide, please. So there are 4 forms of null in Vaisheshika or void. That is prior non-existence, that is nothing existed before, that everything started from zero, you can say. Posterior non-existence, it is absence of something that has ceased to exist, that was previously there but now it is not there. Reciprocal non-being or mutual exclusion or non-identity, that is when A is absent, B is present, or B is absent, A is present, that is it's not present. Or absolute non-existence, the absence of something that neither has existed nor ever will exist. Next slide. In 628 AD, Brahmagupta gave the equations of zero, and it treated zero as a number. Till now we saw zero as null, void, or in nothingness of mind, emptying mind, or as a sandhi, as a lopa. But in when Brahmagupta used it, he used it as a proper number, not in some philosophical way, not as some creator, nothing. It's treated as a raw mathematics, where 0 is a number and it gave some calculations, which is the basis of calculus, mathematics, physics, and now computer science. So here we come that Indians is not credited for inventing 0, because 0 was previously there as wedge shaped, as lines, rods, any form, or blanks. They invented it as a number, understood it, and explained it and used it in mathematics. Next slide. Bijganit means the algebra, how 0 is handled there. So Brahmagupta gave these rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponent, where addition x plus 0 equals to 0 plus x equals to 0 means if something is added with 0, it doesn't add anything. 1 plus 0 is 1 always. It doesn't add any other number. Subtraction is the same way. If 0 is taken out from something, is nothing is taken out from something, it gives the same number. And 0 minus the sum number, it gives negative number. Here the concept of negative number comes. Multiplication, if something is multiplied by 0, it is always 0. In division, 0 divided by something is 0. But something divided by 0 is undefined. No one knows it still now. And in exponent, x to the power 0 equals to 1. And if x equals to 0, means 0 to the power 0, then it would be undefined. Next slide. So the Indians contributed 0 in various forms. First, the null entity means nothingness before everything, which came from the Nasadya Sukta, where the universe started. Next, emptying the mind during yoga, that is meditation. 0, that is used by the grammarian Panini for merging of words. 0, which is used in mantras. 0, that is a void, that is Atma, Man, and space, that is void. 0 of algebra, which is the basic of every mathematics now. And then 0, the Shunya, which became Sirf in Arabic, and 0 in Europe, and now 0 is everywhere. And 0 now, we can see the divisions, how 0 came up in philosophy, grammar, mathematics, and how modern 0 now accept in modern 0. I mean, in science, in physics also, we can say 0 work done. Even if we push a wall, we will tell only 0 work is done, like that. And in computers, as we see, there are different zeros for giving voltages, for calculating complements of numbers, parity, or signs. We represent 0 in various forms now. And I would like to tell that 0, whether it's physical, philosophical, or it's mathematical, it's very important in every basic of every mathematics, as well as science, in philosophy, and everywhere 0 is very important, because if we think of how the universe started, we think of it started from a point, and from nothingness we came. Now the universe is now trillions of trillions far away, expanded. So 0 is very conceptual thing to talk about. I would like to end my slide here. Thank you.
Ms. Upasana, thank you very much. It gives a panoramic view of the evolution of the concept of 0, and later the the emergence of zero in the historical record. There are some issues from our side before I hand the floor to the others to ask questions of you and of Alberto. And this is the tricky part that we're running up against, not only in Indian culture, but also in the Mesopotamian context, in the Egyptian context, in the Chinese context, that what we tend to do is we look from our modern perspective back and make certain assumptions based on our own experience in the present as to what was happening in those days. And it could very well be, again, I leave open this question, it could very well be that every time that we use the word zero, we're already presuming something that may not have been the case at the time. When you talk about the Mesopotamians, for example, having a placeholder zero, it may not have been it may have been a placeholder. They must have realized that something, we need to have the space there to separate the powers, but they did not think of it as a placeholder zero, because the concept simply didn't exist. They knew the placeholder. Same in the Chinese context. They had a different system, and they had an empty column, and they worked with that, and they developed pretty much all of the operating rules that you stated about in the time of Brahmagupta. That even though they did not explicitly state them, and in some cases they did, but usually they simply understood what needed to be done and did that. So they maybe also did not think of it in terms of zero. This is the very trickiest part of the Zero Project that we're running up against, to proceed very cautiously so as not to presume too much from our perspective. I wonder, having said that, whether, if you think about your own talk just now, whether you can see whether that may be the case, or simply that you stick by your presentation. Would you like to respond to that very long question?
Yeah, it's a long question. I mean, first of all, zero, what we are thinking, Brahmagupta brought zero in mathematics, and what previously thought we are thinking as zero, whether it's the same zero or not, it's really an open question, because that might not be the zero, what we are thinking as null or nothingness. We are just trying to relate it with the mathematics, philosophy and mathematics, that nothingness or null or void or the placeholder that the Mesopotamians used are the same related things. Because no one know what came up to Brahmagupta's mind to give those equations on zero. Suddenly, I mean, for me, this is still an open question. Why x to the power 0 equals to 1? Because this is a really open question for me. Because if something to the power 0, how can it be 1? This is still an open question for me, this equation.
Right. So anyway, that's another issue, is that whether he was systematizing knowledge that was around at the time. But see, the issue is that if you go by that definition, and then you look at the Chinese mathematics or the Mesopotamian mathematics or the Egyptian mathematics, even within their own context, in the clear absence of a number zero as we know it, they still had the same operating rules. They still ended up with the right answer. So would you say that they understood it, but they just didn't use the symbol, or they didn't use the mathematical convention that we do? Anyway, I'm not expecting you to give a final judgment on that. That's where we're headed. But your contribution gives a very, very interesting panoramic view again of the Indian concept of void, null, and the mathematical zero. So thank you very much for that, Alberto. Sorry for jumping in here ahead of you, but now really we have the two speakers. We would like to invite each to respond to the other. So Alberto, do you have any questions for Upasana? And then Upasana, any questions that you may have for Professor Pelissero? Alberto?
No, I have no particular question. So please, if Miss Upasana has Mrs. Upasana has some question for me, I am available for answering if I will be able to do it.
Ms. Upasana, you heard the invitation. Do you have any questions for having heard?
Not question. I would like to more, if he gets time or later, about the explanation of Lopa, which we are talking about in Upanishads. We were talking about that thing. I would, if you have.
I have not found any particular reference to Lopa in the Upanishads. It is more familiar to me within Paninian tradition. And particularly, I may recall two sutras by Panini, 114, Nadatu Lopar Dadatuke, and 1.162, Pratyaya Lope Pratyaya Lakshanam. It is a very peculiar Lopa. Sometimes it is translated as extinction, as nullification and something like that, but it is perhaps more keen to translate it at substitution rules. For example, you have some kind of suffixes that are only theoretical suffixes. They are never to be found in the actual form that a word can take according to grammatical rules. And in this case, Lopa means that you have a theoretical form of the word, then you add a suffix, and this suffix is never to be heard because it is immediately substituted by another suffix, and that is the final form of the word. So Lopa in this case is something like a substitutional suffix. It is a process of substitutions, like in informatic rules, when you have one rule following another rule, and then you have, after 1, 2, 3, or 4 successive rules, the final form that you must reach. The same in the grammarian tradition by Panini. So Lopa perhaps is more easy to translate it as a substitution than simply null or because you see, the best gloss is Lopa Madarshanam. Lopa is something that is never to be seen, that you cannot see simply. So it is something that has been substituted for something else. I do not know if I have answered to your question.
Yes, pretty much.
Mayank, would you have any questions for Alberto as follow-up?
I was very impressed by his pointing out that there is a description of zero which says that it has a dot with a hole in the middle or something like that. For the first time, I heard words which describe the shape of zero. In your talk, you said something like that.
It is only the etymological analysis of the term, because if you the most important references are to the phonetic treatises of the Vedic tradition, the Rigveda Pratishakya. So the Pratishakya of the Rigveda Samhita 14.2, rule 14.2, it indicates an utterance with a swollen mouth, with a swelled mouth. And in the Maitri Upanishad, you have 3 passages, 2.4, 6.31, and 7.4. And here you have some synonyms with terms meaning something like pure, clear, pacified, Shuddha, Puta, Shanta. And So the etymological meaning is something, we can say it, that it has been cut, a cutting, a hole, something like a hole. But you can find a lot of references in most current Sanskrit dictionaries like Monier Williams and so on, or Vaman Shivaramapte. You can find a lot of references.
I will look them. Thank you.
Mayank, any other questions?
No, I was very impressed by what Dr. Pelissero said about the representation of zero in Buddhist and other contexts, because this work that Upasana talked about comes around 500 AD. And so there is this idea of growth of these philosophical ideas from Buddhist periods, which beautifully talks even of the shape of zero, saying it's a hole, and the representation of zero looks like a hole. So in that sense, there is somewhere an underlying philosophical connectivity, which is quite... you brought it out very well. That's what I wanted to say. So I wanted to thank you for bringing it out so well.
Thank you. Very, very kind of you. It is really a lot. We have no enough time at our disposal, but really, if we can deepen the concept of apoha, then we see how the semantic field and the mathematical field could be compared, because apoha really means that there is, I try to say in more simple way that is possible to me, it is not possible to define a word positively with positive contents. It is possible only to define the semantical field of each word, trying to say what is not within that semantical field. So it's not possible to give a positive definition of a horse. It is only possible to say that the horse is something that has nothing to do with everything that is not a horse. So double negation. The technique is a double negation technique. This is really very interesting, and it is something that should be investigated, perhaps using two different methodologies, not only philosophical and humanistic methodology, but having always the help of mathematical methodology. I suppose that until we go alone in our way, humanistic sciences without the help of mathematics, and mathematics without the help of humanistic science, we go no way. We have, it is not possible to reach the goal if we not begin to cooperate, to work together.
Well,
can I make just one quick statement?
Sure.
It's interesting. I have a suspicion that at the time of Bhaskara and Varamira, I don't think mathematics was treated as science. It was, I think, treated as a language. It was just a game of words and symbols that they manipulated for the pleasure of doing it. The fact that it is used in science is a Western connectivity. So in that sense, it was still an abstract social science at the time of Varamira and other times. I suspect that this borrowing into physics, they did use it for astronomy, but then it was more a play of language. So mathematics has always this problem of personality. And my suspicion is that they also used it as another language rather than as something connected with science.
I think from what you've both said that you would support our proposal to eventually establish an expertise center on zero, because there's so many angles to it. As Alberto points out, the disciplines have grown apart.
Correct.
At a risk, at a price. On the one hand, gaining tremendous depth of knowledge. On the other hand, also incurring tunnel vision, where they do not see across the boundaries of their own discipline. And we're, the expertise center would bring that back together and then look at it holistically. We are working on that proposal. Alberto is one of the first to sign on to that. Thank you for that. We're in the process of drafting a budget for that. That's what's taking the time, but we're working on that. We have 5 other universities that have signed on. We will revert to that. We're running a little long, so we're now going to go to our very, very, very patient panelists who have had to sit and wait for comments. But Eric, if you would please go ahead and ask any questions of either of the speakers or make any comments.
Yes, thank you, good, Peter. One small comment to Mr. Pelissero. You said you were so much interested in the concept of a POA, and I can tell you that Jean-Paul Sartre designed a similar concept in his Lettres et Liens when he talked about anéantir, nullifications. And it was, he has the same idea, that is defining things without any positive content, without any essences. But my question is also for Alberto. I was impressed by your survey of the Buddhist philosophy. Only, in my opinion, it was a rather modern survey. It was a survey of philosophy as a process of continuous and steady progress. And I ran into some texts of Atisha lately, and in his Vadasha Avatara, he clearly said that he didn't agree with the point of view of the Yogacharyas. He clearly said that the Shravakas and the Tirthikas, the non-Buddhists, and as well the Yogacharyas would never be able to understand anything of Shunyata. And even when he was invited to Tibet, he was asked if he was prepared to teach the same kind of Buddhism as Shantarakshita and Kamalashila, and he declined. He didn't want to answer the question. So I get it from that he didn't agree with you, with your view of Buddhist philosophy as steady progress. He still thought that Nagarjuna was the inventor of a kind of a new philosophy, which we today would call transcendental phenomenology, where Sunyata has a total different meaning from those ontologists like Kamalachila and Shantarakshita. What would you respond to that?
So I had some references to Shantarakshita and Kamalashila, but I had to cut it from the oral exposition. There is a great problem in coping with concept of shunyata within Buddhistic philosophy, because there is a great fracture between the ontological point of view and the methodological point of view in relation to shunyata. That is, a lot of Buddhist teachers strongly refuse the ontological interpretation of shunyata, and they prefer to say that shunyata is only a methodological device, but it is entirely devoid of any content whatsoever. That is, the very same concept of shunyata is shunya. It is not possible to fill the term shunyata with some kind of philosophical content. It is only a methodological device in order to cope with adverse points of view, but it is not appropriate to say that shunyata has a positive semantical content. So I agree with your remarks, and there is a great fracture within Buddhistic thought between the point of view according to which shunyata has some ontological field, and the opposite point of view according to which shunyata has no ontological field at all, because it is itself an empty concept. So it is a useful device in dialectical fight, but it is entirely useless if we try to fill it with some metaphysical or ontological content. I hope that I have answered some way to your question, but it is a very deep question. And even if we come back to the origins of shunya, not only the concept of shunya by Nagarjuna, but even the concept of shunya in the Prajnaparamita literature, you see that within the Prajnaparamita literature, it is possible to detect till to 18 different meanings or 18 different kinds, different types of shunya. There is really a taxonomy of shunyata, of emptiness. There are till to 18 different types of shunyata, starting from adhyatma shunyata till to abhava svabhava shunyata, and so shunyata has been deeply detected.
Yes, thank you.
Victor, please. Any questions?
Yeah, Professor Pelissero, I was quite triggered by your remarkable linking of apoha, of all things, with this shunyata or zero concept. I'm not sure where you got the apoha from for the first time, but and I must say I'm not really an expert on this, only very partial, but as far as I remember, it is for the first time described in Dignaga's Pramana Samutaya, chapter 6.
Yes.
And it seems to be a reaction to the Nyaya Sutra, Nyaya Bhashya doctrine of the meaning of words. To some extent, it seems actually perhaps even to be comparable to it. On the other hand, I know also that in Dharmakirti's Pramana Vartika, the apoha doctrine becomes even more elaborated and a very complicated matter. So, I mean, it's very interesting to look at it as a way of interpreting the concept of zero, but I must admit that I'm really not very convinced either that the apoha doctrine is a serious. I don't understand the philosophical implications of it. I have always a bit of a trouble with this Buddhist philosophy that it seems to be reactions to kind of rhetorical denials of their opponents rather than anything that we would consider to be philosophy in the modern sense of the word.
So according, yes, even my main two sources were Dignaga and then Dharmakirti, but I am not really a specialist about Buddhist philosophy of language. Anyway, if I understand correctly your point of view, you say that the theory of apoha is only some kind of reaction against Nayayika philosophy of language. Perhaps, maybe, it is not. I cannot exclude it, but anyway, all of Indian philosophy of language and all of Indian logic works like that. So there is a Brahmanic point of view, and the Buddhists react to it. There is a Buddhistic point of view, and the Brahmanic schools, darshanas, react to it. So it is in the nature of things to work like that, I suppose. It is not possible to delineate the history of Buddhist logic without the need to cope with Nayayika, with Brahmanic logic, and the same is true for philosophy of language. I suppose that there has been a kind of sometimes it was not really a dialogue, it was a strong fight between the 2 points of view. But anyway, they had to talk with each other. Even when they had to fight, they had to talk with each other. So I suppose that the history of Indian philosophy is a continuous dialogue or a continuous war, a battle between Brahmanical point of view and Shramanical point of view. But it is nothing really new. It is already accepted within ontological community. So I would like really to pay my homage to you, Professor Van Bellert, because I have studied your beautiful works about Kalika Purana, and so I am about. No.
I didn't write on Kalika Purana. On Dharma
No. It's not Kalika Purana. Sorry, it is not going into my memory now. But I have read some of your books, and you are really a great Indologist. I am really honored to be in this panel with you, because you are.
I have actually an article on Apoha that was in the Indian Encyclopedia of Philosophy, edited by Potter. I wrote it maybe 40 years ago, and now only it's published.
I see.
No one wanted to summarize or to write on Dharmakirti, because it's so bloody difficult to understand. But if I have little time also for the other speaker, for Upasana, I was actually also triggered by your mention of the Vaisheshika Sutra, and I assume that you mean the Vaisheshika Sutra, for these the absences or abhava doctrines which you mentioned. And I was quite triggered also by the fact that you mentioned this Anu, this concept of atom in Vaisheshika.
Yes.
What I find also actually remarkable is that it's global, it's spherical, but it doesn't actually, the Vaisheshika Sutra doesn't mention much about the reason why there are atoms, nor why they should be spherical. And I find it actually also quite interesting that you have noticed that this Akasha, this space, and this is also for Pelissero, it's probably the Indian idea of nothingness, because it's infinite in every direction. I find it conceptually extremely interesting. And I might assume that Professor Pelissero could also have a look at Gaudapada, maybe. That's quite interesting. Gaudapada Karikas, which also talk about a very similar sort of conceptualization. I think I would leave it at this, because I very much enjoyed both.
Ms. Upasana, did you want to respond to the comment?
Hello. Yes, sir.
Did you want to respond to the comment, the question by Victor?
I think Dr. Vahia has something to tell about.
Okay. Mayank, would you respond to that?
Yes. So Vaisheshika has this idea saying that if you take a piece of stone and if you keep cutting it indefinitely, clearly that should stop somewhere, and that is where he defines this vague idea of Anu. And he says the primitive. So his definitions are it's limited to this.
Yes, is that Vaisheshika Sutra? I know that only from Nyaya Sutra, but Vaisheshika Sutra, I'm not that familiar with it, but I did not find it actually.
I will try and look at the exact reference of that sentence.
Of course, the later commentaries do say this, but that is already because Nyaya Sutra is a sort of addition to the ideas of Vaisheshika, basically.
I will check whether there's an exact reference in Vaisheshika.
It'd be very interesting, yeah. Also, the history of the word, where this concept of atom comes from. I mean, this is my private interest. How did it come to this idea? Except from the fact that you cannot divide indefinitely.
That's all.
But why is it globular, for instance? Why is it spherical?
No, so Yeah, actually, the word atom, the translation to word atom is a misnomer. It is not the atom if we understand the current sense of the word,
No, of
because
course,
it doesn't
I
have the
don't
kind
know.
of properties it does have.
No.
It is simply that if you keep cutting, there is an endpoint that
No.
you will reach, is what he defines it as. And he defines saying that the properties of the that is the smallest unit that carries properties. But even in defining properties, it is not very clear on this. And in that sense, Vaisheshika, to translate it as atom is actually a misnomer, just the smallest particle of unit. But the idea is that there are, out of the Panch Mahabhuts, 4 have this and 1 doesn't. And that
The
doesn't
Greek
have
word
an
atomos
atom.
also means you cannot cut it further. I mean, the Greeks
Exactly.
actually got this from the same reasoning.
Yes. So
Based
that
on the same
Akasha,
reason,
etc., that he comes up with. And
Yeah.
there he says, so there again he says the smallest then is not a unit that can be defined.
Yeah.
Only in that sense it is interesting, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. It's going a little bit off on a tangent as far as
Yes.
zero is concerned, although everything is related to it ultimately. But we have to mind the time also, running quite late, an hour and 16 minutes, and we still have a little bit to go. So if I jump in here, I would like to conclude by asking Alberto, Mayank, and Upasana to answer in a single question, no more discussion, the following questions, which will help us to pinpoint our research. Was the numeral 0 discovered or invented? We'll go with the lady first, Ms. Upasana. Was the number 0, was it discovered or invented? One word.
I think it was invented.
Okay,
For
thank
me.
you. Alberto, was the number 0 discovered or invented?
Even for me, invented, but I suppose I have no particular competence about this field. According to me, invented.
Okay, Mayank?
Yeah, so numeric, the placeholder 0 was discovered. It was a utilitarian discovery in that sense. But abstract 0 was clearly invented.
Okay. Then the second question, this transition then between what you just mentioned, the placeholder 0, the transition between that and the numeral 0, was it a gradual evolutionary process or was it a disruptive moment in history? Ms. Upasana? Ms. Upasana? Ms. Upasana?
For me, I think it's a gradual transition. People need thought of 0 to use how to use it.
Right.
So they came up with the idea.
Okay. Alberto, was it a gradual evolutionary process or a disruptive moment in history?
I have not. I understand the difference between gradual and disruptive, but I have no caught the point of the question. Please, could you say again the question for me?
Yeah, we're asking certain questions to do with the central thesis of the Zero project and trying to find the origin of Zero. So we're asking, and then the placeholder 0 had been around for a long time, and then suddenly it appears as though the number 0 appears, and everyone pays tribute to that fact. And we're questioning, what exactly was the context of that. So the question is now, was the transition between this placeholder and the number 0, was it a gradual evolutionary process or a disruptive moment in history?
Thank you. A gradual evolutionary process, according to me.
Okay. So, Mayank, did you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it was disruptive, but it was not one individual who did it. There was a 100-year period where everybody was experimenting with this language, and that is when they disruptively invented 0.
Okay, that makes sense. And the final third question is, again, goes to the layer below that we're digging. We're digging beyond mathematics because mathematics never evolves in a vacuum. It always evolves in a cultural context. And all that we have discussed today suggests to me more and more that if the cultural context is rich enough, the intellectual climate, that you're more inclined to come up with a new concept such as the number 0, that's what it was, than if the cultural climate was not conducive to that. On the contrary, if for example the concept of emptiness or nothingness was rejected out of hand for dogmatic reasons, for whatever, then you're not likely to pursue that and invent not a zero as a number. And that seems to be what has happened. So the question is, this concept of nothingness and emptiness that we've been talking about, is it trivial or profound?
Hello? Can you just repeat the question once?
Yeah, was the concept of nothingness or emptiness, is it trivial? Is it a trivial concept? Nothingness is nothingness, there's just nothing there. It's trivial, or is it really profound, this concept?
I can't shed any light on this,
Okay,
because
fine.
it's
That's very fair, very fair, very fair, very honest also. Alberto, nothingness, emptiness, profound or trivial?
According to me, it is profound, but it is always at risk of being perceived and being discussed as a trivial one.
Right.
In itself, it is profound, it is deep, but it is always at risk of being trivialized.
Right. Exactly. Very clear. Mayank?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a profound concept whose profoundness is not easy to catch.
Okay. So thanks a lot for that. Thank you all for joining, and join us again, talking now to our virtual audience, to join us again the week after next to explore related issues to pinpoint, if possible, zero's epicenter, when we will meet Mrs. Deborah Axel and her daughter, Dr. Miriam Axel, who are also co-organizers of this online event, who will tell us about the singular quest of finding zero by the late Professor Amir Axel. Thanks again. Until then.